All right, then we're gonna call to order the City of Sherwood Planning Commission for June 12th, 2018. Roll call.
Chair Simpson,
Here.
Commissioner Call,
Yes.
Commissioner Kai,
Here.
Commissioner Scott,
Present.
Vice Chair Flores,
Here.
Commissioner Holm,
Here.
and Commissioner Matzinger. Absent.
All right, and I am supposed to remind everybody that this is being recorded for later viewing. It will not be broadcast live at this time. And we are asked to speak up because there is only one single microphone on the camera itself. So that's all I got. All right, we have no council liaison this evening. Does anybody have a report from the council for us? All right, staff announcements. Rolling right along. Community comments. Community comments are limited to those items not already on the agenda. Whether it's for community comments this evening or for the public hearing that we're having, we ask that you fill out one of these blue testimony forms and turn it into one of the staff members on the table to my right. All right, I see no one racing up to speak under community comments. Already on 5 of 7 items for this evening. Number 5 is new business. We have a public hearing and I have a disclosure to read. A public hearing on PUD 1701, SUD 1701, final development plan is called to order. The public hearing this evening will be conducted as follows. Staff will present the staff report. Questions, if any, by the hearing body for staff. We will then open the public hearing for testimony and time will be limited as follows. The applicant will have 30 minutes split between presentation and rebuttal. Persons in favor of the application will have 4 minutes each. Persons opposed to the application will have 4 minutes each. The rebuttal from the applicant is the remainder of the 30 minutes. We will then close the public hearing and other comments will be heard from the public or the applicants. There'll be final comments by staff, questions of staff, if any, by the commission, and discussion by the commission. A decision may be made by the planning commission at the close of the hearing, or the matter may be continued to a time and date certain. If the matter is continued to a date certain, this will be the only notice of that date you receive. If you wish to speak, please fill out one of the blue testimony forms and submit it to the planning commission secretary. The chair will recognize people who wish to speak and any questions should be addressed through the chair. When you come forward to speak, please state your name and address for the record. In reaching a decision on the application, the commission must consider whether the application meets the relevant approval criteria in the city's land use regulations. Those criteria are identified in the staff report. There are 2 copies of the staff report available in the room this evening. The testimony and evidence must address these criteria or other criteria you believe to apply to the decision. Please note failure to raise an issue with enough detail to enable the commission, the applicant, and the parties an opportunity to respond to the issue precludes an appeal to the City Council or Land Use Board of Appeals on that issue. Also, failure by the applicant to raise constitutional or other issues regarding proposed conditions of approval, again with enough detail to allow the commission to respond to the issue, precludes an action for damages in circuit court. For this hearing, this is a decision that will be made by the planning commission this evening, and it's the final decision, and appeal would be to the City Council. At this time, I would like to ask members of the commission to discuss any ex parte contacts, bias, or conflicts of interest, indicate the nature and extent of the ex parte contact, bias, or conflict of interest, and indicate whether you intend to participate in or abstain from the hearing. And I'll start by saying I had a brief conversation with Commissioner Cottle this afternoon. He asked a question regarding the view corridor and the Southeast Sherwood master plan and whether it was incorporated, and I believe staff will probably give this a similar explanation to me, which is the City Council adopted parts of the Southeast Sherwood master plan years ago, but not in its entirety, and that was the general nature of our discussion, and there were a couple of questions regarding process about, right before the hearing with Commissioner Fine, Commissioner Holm, regarding we're the final authority this evening, and it's a site plan review. Does anybody else wish to disclose any other oh, and I intend to participate in this.
Same with what she just said.
Any other commissioners wish to disclose ex parte contact, bias, or conflict of interest? Does any member of the audience wish to challenge any planning commissioner member's ability to participate this evening? Hearing none, the planning staff will now present the staff report. And just for clarification again, we have one microphone, so when we get up to speak, we'll have to do it clearly. And then we have handouts that follow the staff report. How will the audience?
There's a PowerPoint, so the audience would be, yeah, so the power, so you don't have to turn your heads.
Well,
That's the key. Are you ready?
I am.
Okay, great. Well, good evening, everyone. Joy Chang with the Planning Department. The proposal in front of you, in front of the commission tonight is the Denali Lane Final Development Plan and the Final Subdivision Plat Review. Here we go. So just as a reminder, plan unit development is a two-step process. The first step is the preliminary development plan approval, where the planning commission makes a recommendation to city council, and city council renders the decision. And some of the commission was part of that first step, recommending approval with conditions to city council. And on March 6, 2018 of this year, city council adopted ordinance 2018-004, approving the 7-lot plan unit development and subdivision with conditions of approval. Once a preliminary development plan approval is received, then the second step can happen. The applicant would submit a detailed final development plan and a final subdivision plat for review and approval by the planning commission. And this is the stage we're in now. So the site is located in southeast Sherwood, as shown on the right image of this slide. Off of Southwest Murdoch Road, north of Sherwood View Estate, and south of Ironwood. The left image of the slide identifies the parcel with zoning of very low density residential planned unit development. The required approval criteria are identified on this slide. 1640.030 states that upon approval of the PUD overlay zoning district and the preliminary development plan by city council, the applicant shall prepare a detailed final development plan as per this chapter for review and approval of the planning commission. The final development plan shall comply with all conditions of approval as per section 1640.020. And furthermore, since the plan unit development involves a subdivision of land, a final plat must be prepared and submitted for final approval pursuant to chapter 16.120, which is the subdivision section. So specific conditions applicable during the final development plan phase are those listed under prior to approval of PUD final development plan and subdivision plat. So preliminary plans, conditions of approval, those are items B1 through B13. So I've listed them all up here so that you guys can get a grasp in regards to what conditions we're looking at and making sure that they're being satisfied. So all these three conditions listed on this slide are satisfied or have been satisfied or can be met as reflected within the written staff report. So this slide shows the overall view of the subdivision with a connection to Southwest Murdoch Road, to Ironwood, and extending Southwest Denali Lane to the south. More details are shown on this particular slide, where the slide itself, as the image and the table, identifies that the net difference of the tax lots is 85 square feet from the approved preliminary plans. One of the key requirement is that it has to be consistent of what was preliminarily approved. And with 85 square foot difference net, it's very consistent. So here again is an image, a view side by side of what was approved. So the image to the left is the approved preliminary plans, and the image to the right is the proposed final development plan. As shown, the number of lots and lot patterns are consistent with each other. And as shown in the previous table, again, the net difference is 85 square feet. Since writing the staff report, the city engineering department has finalized the review of the final subdivision plan and determined that it is consistent with the proposed public improvement plans. Planning staff also reviewed the subdivision plan and determined that it is also consistent. The final subdivision plan required a minor word revision, and the corrected final subdivision plan is now dated June 11th, 2018, and that was handed out to you guys earlier. So that's the only difference is that change in red where it was water, it's now sewer.
It's a good change.
Yeah. So-
Not interchangeable. Much the same.
So this slide shows the proposed final subdivision plan. And again, as previously discussed, the subdivision plan is consistent with the preliminary approval. So finally, testimony received. So we required public notices were completed, and staff received 2 written testimonies. One from the community, and which was Exhibit E of your packet, and one from the applicant, which is Exhibit F, that was emailed to you, but hard copy was just placed in front of you today. The testimony from the walkers identified concerns consisting of the general condition A13, which is not part of the subdivision review and the final development plan, but it is a general condition. So A13 basically reads, no part of any structure on lot 2 shall exceed the finished floor elevation of the existing structure to the west. They also requested clarification of finished floor elevation. And staff agrees that finished floor elevation is the lowest habitable livable space. And in regards to the view corridor, the Southeast Master Plan in parts says, the height and specific location of the buildings along the Denali Lane extension will be important. The further ease in the lowering height these homes are constructed, the less they will block eastward views from the adjacent home to the west. The view corridor is identified within the Southeast Master Plan. However, it was never delineated. So there wasn't any engineering part, or surveys that actually delineated it. But it was identified within the Southeast Master Plan. And as previously mentioned too, there were no significant changes to the lot patterns between lot 1 and 2. Therefore, the request for the modifications to the CCNRs for the tree height restriction on lot 1, staff feels that it's not necessary. And the last request relates to oral testimony as far as testimony process, and the Plan Commission can definitely address that versus staff. So the second written testimony was from the applicant, Tim Roth. Mr. Roth basically replied to the walkers' written testimony, and his concerns relate to proposed changes to the existing conditions of approval. So based on the review of the applicant's submittal, the Sherwood Zoning and Community Development Code, agency comments and findings in fact in the staff report, staff recommends approval of the Denali Lane PUD subdivision final development plan and final plat, subject to ongoing conditions of approval. That concludes my staff report, and I can answer any questions from you.
Does anybody have any questions of the staff? Yes.
I have a couple. What's the height limits on a single-family home?
So it varies depending on the zoning. So for this, I can tell you what it is. All right, so very low density residential PUD is 30 feet or 2 stories.
So they couldn't have,
And it's the maximum height is the lesser of the feet or stories. So it's 30 or 2 stories, so.
okay, because it's probably gonna be a daylight basement, because it looks like it's a hill. And a lot of those daylight basements will have a 3rd story, like above the garage or something. They wouldn't be able to do that in very low residential.
No, the max, because the height, it depends on how we define as far as building height, and I can tell you how we define it as far as measurement.
Yeah,
And it-
I thought you measured from the lowest point you said of habitable space up.
No, all I said was that the maximum height is the lesser of feet or stories. So
Okay.
let's just say it could be 2 stories, or it could be 30 feet, whichever is the lesser. of
Where
the
do you
two.
measure from? Because on a daylight basement, it may be significantly lower than where the main home is
Right.
coming off the grade.
So by definition, under 16.10, building height, the vertical distance above a reference datum measured to the highest point of the coping of the flat roof or the deck line of a mansard roof, or the average height of the highest gable of a pitched or hip roof.
From?
The
Because you have
reference
it-
datum, right. The height of a step or terrace building is the maximum height of any segment of the building. The reference datum shall be selected by the following criteria, which yields of the greater height. So I'll tell you what those are. A, the elevation of the highest adjoining sidewalk or ground surface within 5-foot horizontal distance of the exterior wall of the building when such sidewalk or ground surface is not more than 10 feet above lowest grade. Or B, the elevation 10 feet higher than the lowest grade when the sidewalk or ground surface.
That helps, that helps.
Okay,
That helps me understand. The other question I have, is 2 others, is in the CC&Rs, does it allow the city to enforce the CC&Rs? Because the purpose of it I saw was we want them to maintain the lots that we give. Well, what would stop this? The homeowner association says we don't want to maintain them, so we're not going to charge ourselves to maintain them if the city cannot enforce their own CC&Rs against us. Are we going to be an enforceable member?
We did have a conversation about that at the council level. Ultimately, putting it in CC&Rs is what satisfied the 2 interested parties. So whether or not that's going to be enforceable by the city, I'm a little skeptical, but that was the mechanism that satisfied both parties.
And then lastly, on lot 2 is the only one with the view corridor through it.
so it was determined during the first initial preliminary review that, through testimony, that it was lot 2. So, but at the same time, there wasn't an actual survey that was done before then. The community, specifically the Walkers, basically said it is lot 2 and not lot 1 like we were looking at previously. And so we basically catered to that request and very specifically addressed it on, as far as conditioned it to lot 2.
And so lot 2 increased by 41 feet, so your interpretation of what the city council means is now that it's 41 feet more, that extra 41 feet is included in the view, or is it just the lot size at the time the city council put the condition on?
I don't think the lot size has any impact on the view corridor issue.
Right, it's not, it's, okay, so.
Well,
one-
it does if they would have decreased the amount of it and put some of it into lot 1, and then they could have had a different building envelope.
The lot sizes for lots 1 and 2 are almost identical. I
Right,
guess-
I'm just asking if the view corridor is over the additional portion of lot 2 that was added to it. Is that, that's how I look at it, I think.
Okay, because, I mean, literally, when you say additional, we're looking at. let me just-
41 feet.
Right. And so it also talks about, so the way that the condition is very specifically written, it's a general condition that we would be implementing at the time that they submit
Okay.
building plans.
Right.
And it's really difficult to identify where the start point when there isn't the engineering and the survey work that accompanies that. We would require the applicant to provide us proof that they can meet the standard.
Okay.
at the time of building permitting, the plot review.
That's all the questions
I did have a question, because
Yes.
that raises the question as to why we don't have building elevations in part of a regular site plan. I'm used to seeing
Yeah.
full building elevations and more detail then. So I was,
Okay,
as you were reading, I was trying to look through my code for 020 that defined what constituted a complete.
right, so there is a difference, so if, let's just say this was a commercial development or industrial development, they would have to go through a site plan review that basically looks at elevations and making sure that all the design elements are being satisfied, and that's when we would typically require elevations. Any given subdivision, it doesn't have to be this one, any of them, we don't typically ask for elevations, just because, developers could have like 6 standard, types of homes, but we're not at the stage in regards to, there's no design element required
But there
tied to
is.
it. So this is a little unusual, where since this is a planned unit development, some of you were part of that process and we did implement the architectural pattern book. That is gonna, play in regards to implementing exactly the design that we're gonna be, looking at. So there are very specific conditions within, or requirements, design requirements in that pattern book that will also be looked at the time of building review.
So it's done at building permit time, not at the site plan review.
Correct.
Because
And
it's a
that's-
residential zone.
Correct.
Yeah.
And that's a
Correct.
staff review then, it doesn't come to the commission.
That is correct, but we know that there are special circumstances for this particular subdivision, so we're fully aware of what those requirements are and, and flag them just to make sure that all the conditions are being satisfied prior to, issuance of the building permit. Because if the standards can't be satisfied, or the conditions can't be satisfied, we would basically not be able to issue that building permit.
And that building permit approval condition also goes through what we're going to be talking about probably is the building elevation as it impacts the view corridor, and so that's going to.
That is one of the key items that we are going to be looking at, in
So-
addition to setbacks, building height, building height, the typical development standards that we would look at, placement of the house, we would look at all of that.
Okay, so under our purview tonight is not whether or not the building envelope that is depicted on these site plans is exact to what the final
That is
building
correct.
plans are
That
going
is
to be.
correct. Right, because I did ask, they are, the envelopes that are portrayed in the submitted plans are preliminary. Anyone can build anywhere as long as it's engineered correctly. And so
And it
without,
meets the conditions.
right, and it's engineered correctly and meets the conditions, then we would be able to grant, building permits for them.
So just for clarification, can you then, I just want restatement of what the planning commission exactly is under mandate to review tonight?
Okay.
What specific items do we have to make sure I know you already did it once, but
Oh,
I
no,
just wanna make
that's
sure we
fine.
don't lose,
That's fine, so.
don't
I'm
go
just-
down the wrong bunny trail
Oh, no,
here.
that's fine. So, there's certain trigger points in regards to the land use application.
Mhm.
And the way that the trigger points, when we're writing conditions of approval, there's general conditions, which the height requirement is listed on there. There's like general condition like, all the property owners have to roll their garbage up to the street. Just the general conditions that are applicable. And then, that's subsection A, and then subsection B, which we're reviewing tonight, is prior to approval of PUD final development plan and subdivision plat. So those are conditions very specifically to items 1 through 13. And many of them is just making sure that the CCNRs are correct, the plat is correct in regards to right-of-way dedication, public utility easements, and just making sure that everything that was required as far as for final development plan is still consistent to what was approved preliminarily. So that there isn't, and that the minor changes or minor tweaks are not significant enough for us to not be able to approve it. And the applicant has proven that the changes are so minor that, I wrote findings stating that they're satisfied.
Okay, and this is different, because normally in a regular site plan review, these conditions of approval, especially in the sections, not just B, but B through H, like at our last hearing, these never get brought back to us to make sure that the applicant has complied with any sections of this, because the staff does the check mark.
That is correct. Since this is a plan unit development, there is an extra layer of compliance. And that's why we are just making sure that all the conditions within this subsection are being completed. Because typically, for a site plan, a final site plan review, it is an administrative decision. I would basically check off, and say, yes, this condition is satisfied, and then render a one-page decision saying it's been satisfied.
And this is different because it's a PUD, and in some of our history, PUDs are 50 or 60 acres, and they come in over multiple years in different phases, and so that's why the double layer. In this instance, it's a small parcel, and so it seems extra, but if we have a set of rules that apply to all PUDs.
Exactly. So one prime example would be like a commercial plan unit development, where it might be 5 lots, but only one lot is going to get developed. Then that person would submit their final site development plan, which you would see elevations and look at making sure that all the approval criteria are being satisfied, and the intent of the preliminary approval is still being met. And then 10 years later, another parcel could be developed, so that's why it is a little unique, where this is a subdivision, a small subdivision, and a lot of the work was done through the first stage, and they were pretty much ironed out through the preliminary plan approval.
And I appreciate you taking the extra time, because we have also in that time had change of commissioners, so people that were here are not here, so I'm just trying to make sure that we kind of lay out the process and that we're all tracking along the same.
So I do want to point out that all the other conditions that are not under B are still ongoing. So we're going to be implementing those at every stage, like prior to public improvement contract, prior to issuance of the building permit, prior to occupancy. All those things are still ongoing. So it's not as if we've forgotten about them. They are still conditions of approval that are tied to this project.
Okay, so clean water services and engineering and traffic all happen later, and we are only tasked with the 13 conditions of approval to verify compliance and any other potential items that haven't been already addressed as part of a regular site plan.
Correct.
Okay.
Is that also why, I know earlier we had an architectural pattern book, and I don't see that here, is that?
Because
It's already out there as part of the approved PUD, but it's
Correct.
not germane to this hearing, is that?
Correct,
Okay.
that is correct, because it was ironed out through the first stage, so that is why. That still goes with the conditions of approval, and we will be applying that definitely at the time of building permit.
Right.
Are there any other questions regarding process or the site plan itself before we call the applicant up? We're at a different. Can't see, can't see
We don't have the
everybody.
arc.
I know, we don't have the arc, and so there's. All right, then, we have the applicant this evening, Steve Miller.
Good evening, thank you for your time. Steve Miller, Steve Miller, Mimario Design LLC, 6445 Southwest Fallbrook Place, Suite 100, Beaverton, Oregon, 97008. You guys have a lot of discussion already with staff, so I think you're pretty well up to date with what we're doing tonight. And we do have a couple new planning commissioners, so they're at a little bit of a disadvantage because they don't have all the history here that the people who were here previously do have. One thing I'd like to iterate is we spent a significant amount of time with you folks going through this process, and we also spent a significant amount of time with the city council as well as with the walkers working through this process. And one thing that's very important to note is when we went to the city council, we took your southeast area master plan and superimposed that over top of our over top of our plat, so we could show to the best of our ability where the corridor was based on that master plan. And per that master plan, it was very clear that it was over lot 1. And we were ready to have some conditions placed on lot 1 to help protect the view corridor for the walkers. However, during that meeting, the walkers were adamant that the view corridor was not over lot 1, that it was directly to the east of their property, right over lot number 2. And so we took a recess during that council meeting, and we had city council, we had staff, we had several staff members, we had Erica there, and also the community development director, as well as ourselves, as well as the walkers, and we debated this. And we settled with them during that meeting on where the view corridor was and that it was over lot number 2. Unfortunately, we were at a disadvantage in that negotiation because we did not realize that they had a daylight basement. And we agreed to having the roof height on lot 2 be the finished floor elevation of their home. So the roof height on lot 2 would not impede their view of Mount Hood. And so everybody agreed to that. And specific conditions were crafted, which are the ones you already discussed a little bit, which were tree heights, which were roof heights, which were that it was on lot number 2 and not lot number 1. So it's a little discouraging to be here tonight and see a letter from the walkers indicating that, oh, wait a minute, it's lot number 1, it's not lot number 2. As a matter of fact, it's both. It's both lots now. And I think staff gave a very good presentation to indicate to you that through this land use process, one thing that happens is you go out and square the property up as you come into the final plat process, which is where we're at tonight. This is really a final plat review process. That's it. And that's why the limited conditions that we're required to comply with for this review process are the ones under subsection B, because they're the ones that apply to the final plat that we're here to try and get done tonight. And so I'm amiss at why I am here to talk about lot number 1 possibly tonight, and not just sit here and say that we are in compliance with all conditions that everybody agreed to through the land use process. We have a final land use decision from your city council that was not appealed, that was agreed to by all parties here tonight, and now we're talking about lot number 1. I don't think that's very fair to us. I don't think that's very fair to your process, and I don't think that's very fair to the developer to have to sit here and come back tonight and go back through all the history that we have getting to this point tonight to try and talk about where the view corridor is that's based on an unadopted plan that we did our very, very best to try and comply with, and we yielded to our neighbors to the west based upon their information telling us that the view corridor is over lot number 2. We went and surveyed that elevation. We have that elevation. We know what the height is, and we're prepared to build to that. And now we're here talking about number 1. I just don't think that's a fair process. I don't think we should be subject to that, and I think we should be subject to only the conditions that are applicable for this particular review application, which are under B of the decision that was not appealed and is now a final land use decision. So I don't really have a lot more to share, but I'm hopeful that everybody understands that we have a final land use decision, that it was approved by your city council, and that all parties here tonight agreed to those conditions of approval at that process. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you guys have.
Okay, before we ask questions, can staff give us the time of the,
That took 4 minutes, 39 seconds.
okay. Because now when we ask questions, you're not on time, so we
Can I ask
have,
a staff question?
yes.
Ms. Turner, can we change the conditions that the city council's already approved? I mean, do we have that authority?
That is not what this hearing is about.
Right, so we don't have any
This is just
authority to say 1 or 2, it's 2, because that's what the council
That's what the
said.
final,
Okay, that's- I just wanted
That's what the final land use decision says. This is
Okay.
just about whether this complies with those.
Okay.
conditions.
Okay, are there any other questions
Well,
of the
no question,
applicant? Did your, I did have one question, so did the line between the designation, so we have this 41 feet, did you move the line over to make lot bigger?
No, we did not. What we did is, we did a boundary survey and squared the property up based on the physical location of the property. So when we did the initial plat, we were relying on some old data, and we didn't have time to field verify before we submitted the application. And so moving into final plat, the surveyors went out there and reconfirmed the points for this property, and it tweaked a little bit of the lot lines a little bit to get them squared up per the property. So that's not an uncommon practice in land development, to get an application submitted. As staff has indicated, you see this pretty typically on, through the platting process.
So the line between lot 1 and lot 2 sounds like it may have moved in a small amount.
Small amount.
Which direction did it move and by how much?
I believe it moved a little bit to the, let me get my bearings here, to the south.
Okay.
And I don't have it in front of me to be able to tell you exactly how much of that, but
I think I saw that in your
it was
report.
minor.
It would have been like an inch or two for the whole length of the property in 40 feet. Right?
I tried to look, I couldn't tell from that.
It's,
I thought I saw it written up in one of those, it may have been in the Walker's letter, I thought I saw it somewhere. But that would be good information to have, because otherwise, I mean, if it's minuscule amount, I tend to
yeah.
regard it, but if it's over 10 feet, that's.
It was-
There
it
is,
was-
there is, there is.
One at a time. All right, so
Plus
that's
6
showing
square
us.
feet to the total lot size.
Yeah, but square feet isn't the question. The question is, it moved, the line itself moved south.
Right, but I'm saying.
But other parts of the lot could have
I understand
moved
that,
as
I
well.
understand that, but do you understand how minor 6
I
square
do,
feet is?
but that's-
Okay,
but-
so that could be a 1 foot difference over the course of that whole lot line to
Sure.
the south between the east end, or the west end, excuse me, to the east end.
Sure.
So I can move that 1 foot, and that would be more than 6
Agreed.
square feet.
But we
So
also
that's how
don't know
minor
where
it
else
was.
things
That's how
could
minor
change.
it was. I'm just trying to let you know that it's less than 1 foot over the distance between the east side and the
I
west
completely
side.
understand that. I also understand the difference between square footage, which can move in multiple places, and how far in a single direction that line moved south. You mentioned it moved south. Did it move south a foot,
I
10
would say
feet,
less, I
2
would say less
inches?
than a half a foot. To get 6 square feet over that distance, it would be less than a foot.
Assuming none of the other boundaries moved. Because if other boundaries also changed, that 6 square foot could have been offset elsewhere.
Can you go back to the slide that shows both of them side by side? I'll let you look at it. I mean, you can look at it, and you can see.
Yeah, I'm looking at that and I can't,
You can see
it doesn't tell me.
That's how minor it is.
Clearly.
That's the point I'm trying to emphasize with you, sir, is that it is so minor, you can't even depict it on 2 plans.
Could I join you up there for a minute?
No.
Wait a second.
Chairman, can I ask a question that may aid in a resolution to this? Would you agree that lot 2, even though it got bigger by 41 square feet, I think?
That means the lot line to the south moved on lot 2, so lot 1 moved fractionally.
I understand that. Would you agree that in the increase in the lot size is also now included in the view corridor? That extra feet, wherever it came from, is now part of the view corridor.
Right, but if the view
Oh,
corridor, if the view corridor has always been over lot number 2.
We're not debating that because we don't have the authority to change what the council did, right? So whether you increased it a foot or 50 feet, whatever you increased it is now encumbered by that view corridor because it's in lot 2. Is that your understanding?
That's what everybody agreed to, is that the view corridor is over lot 2.
Okay, so it could have been moved by 50 feet and he just increased the view corridor to the people to the west.
So the view corridor has been agreed to, that it's on lot 2, and that the,
That's not really
Adjustment.
before us now. We're just here to make sure that condition stays because we can't change it from 1 to 2.
we're not offering to change the condition, we're agreeable to the conditions. We agreed to them with city council, is what I'm trying to get at, and that we have not done anything that's contrary to any land development process to alter that.
I
We've not
understand.
tried to do that at all, and so, I just want to make sure that we understand that we do have an approved land use decision with conditions that have been agreed to by all the parties that are here tonight. And that we've done this in a good faith effort to try and assure that they have a view. We've tried to negotiate some other things with the Walkers. We had a mutual disagreement on that, that's fine, that's where that ended. We didn't push the issue. We came here tonight to bring forward our final plat to show that we're in compliance with the decision that your city council has issued. I think we've demonstrated that. Staff seems to believe that we've done a great job with doing that, and we're looking forward to building the project.
Okay.
Excellent. Any more questions of the applicant before we call up?
I guess I didn't get an answer on my question, so it doesn't sound like anybody has the answer, so I'm unsatisfied, but I guess we have to move on. So.
Right. We don't know the amount of the shift to the south of the line.
Specifically, this line right here shifted south. I'm curious by how much, and
I'm sorry, I don't have that answer for you, but I think that it's been demonstrated that it's fractional. I think you.
That may be.
And I think we all agree that it's fractional.
well, I can't say, I don't know how much of it, so.
I think based on what you said for 6 square feet, I think we understand.
Yeah, but
that
square
that's-
footage is not, square footage can be masked by other lines moving around the lot, so it doesn't, square footage doesn't answer my question
If
in
another
any way,
line
shape, or
moved to the
form.
west along Denali, for example, if the
Sure.
lot line, then that would not be a concern of yours, correct?
I'm sorry, what?
So if the lot line to the east moved, that wouldn't be a concern of yours. It seems like your concern is the lot line along the south of lot
Well,
1.
that's the one that potentially
Right. and that's
plays
what I'm trying-
into a view
Correct.
corridor
No, I
change or a
understand.
tree height change, and so I'm curious.
And that's what I'm saying.
How much of
If
it?
you move that line to get 6 square feet, and I think you agree with this, I might be wrong, but I believe you do, it's fractional to get 6 square feet.
I don't
And
know.
if another line moved, then it would have been not the south lot line, it would have been the lot line to
Right,
the
but if
east.
multiple lot lines move, you can end up with a very small square footage change, even though a line itself, one line may have moved 5 feet, linear feet or something.
Because when you move a line, the square footage is calculated over the.
I know how square footage works, I'm
Well,
very,
that's
very
what I'm saying.
aware.
I'm just saying.
But
if you
also,
understand that-
if multiple lines move,
So I have a question, and then we can ask
Yeah.
it if so this is maybe over a foot, it could be over 20 feet if they had changed it. So my question is, potentially to Josh, when the council made their decision that the view corridor is on lot 2 based on this configuration and the footage that was represented on the map, if the map changed by 5 feet or 10 feet one way or the other, do we go to the map markings that the council approved? Is the code does the PUD recognize the original lot 2 delineation versus a revised lot 2 delineation? And it may be 6 inches today or 25 inches today, but will this line change before it comes in for a building permit?
So
So
to
it's
answer the
two
question
questions.
about, right, and I have to defer to other staff on whether it will change before the building, I don't know the answer to that. But the way the conditions of approval are written, they are tied to the lot numbers. So lot number 2, the building height is limited. That's how the view corridor is, the view corridor is protected through those conditions, restricting building height and tree height. And those are tied to the lot number. So that will be based on what that final alignment of the lots are. So however, wherever those lines are for lot 2, the building on that lot will have those height restrictions. Wherever the lines are for the other lots,
And that's
those
based on the
trees will
council
be based on.
decision.
Correct.
So the view corridor is not a fixed geographic point, it's purely tied to a specific lot.
The way that we address the view corridor is tied to specific elements.
Okay, so
So in regards to the plat being finalized, and that's why any type of platting, it doesn't matter if it's a planned unit development, but any type of subdivision is a 2-step process where it's a preliminary, where it is, it's not the thorough detail that would be required for a platting. Ideally, this is what we would do is, if you guys approve this tonight, we would actually submit this to Washington County Survey, and they might have to look at this one more time and make recommendations, because it has to be consistent and all the lines have to tie up together. But typically, as far as patterning, everything is consistent with what we would be looking at tonight. So
So
nothing will change in regards to that there might be an east or a west, you know, some typographical things that might need changing to be consistent with Washington County standards, as far as survey standards. But again, these are the lots that are gonna move forward towards the building.
So let me just do a worst case scenario that is highly unlikely to occur, but let's say Washington County gets the plat marquee and they say that the corner mark that they were using for their engineering thing is 2 feet off, and the corner mark is actually here, and that shifts everything 2 feet. Not likely to happen in
They
new
already
GP
have the plan,
new-
just so you know, they already
But
have
I'm
it.
just saying, if that were to occur and everything moved down 2 feet, it doesn't change what we can do regarding lot 2, lot 1, building size, building height, because the council tied it to that specific lot, and that is how.
So there's no amount of shift that would trigger any kind of reevaluation of the intent.
Well, if it's
No,
substantial.
It wouldn't be compliant with the preliminary if the alignment were just totally different.
Right.
So,
That goes within this margin of error.
whatever would trigger it to be non-compliant could then reopen that conversation potentially, or they'd have to be rejected essentially.
Right.
But since we're in general compliance, it's
Right.
out of our scope. Okay,
And
that's
I'll
fair.
bring up one more final point of clarification for you, and I apologize, Mr. Scott, for the conversation, but if you look at these two plans, and I believe your engineering department will support me on this one, the curve on the approved preliminary plan was too tight for that street. And really the biggest change that you see through these lots is adjusting Denali Lane to get it to function at the standard that it was supposed to that it was supposed to operate at. And so most of the adjustment is moving the road, just flatten it a little bit. So the lot lines became longer and shorter so on the east side, those lot lines shrunk a little bit. And on the west side, they got elongated as we adjusted the street. So I stand corrected, it really wasn't a shift north to south more than it was east to west to get that road straightened a little bit. So it operated to the ASHTO standards that are required for this level of street.
No, I understand.
Again, I apologize for the confusion on that.
Yeah, it seemed like a question that somebody would have an answer to, but it's okay.
Can I get the staff to read out the width of the lot to the west when it was proposed to the city? Because it looks like it's like 89 something, and then where it's getting approved, I can't read it because it's fuzzy and my eyes are bad. It looks like it's like 144 or something. I can't tell.
They're different, yeah.
I just can't see it.
The measure that we're wanting to know is actually mismarked on this map.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So
That
if
was
you
the
look,
problem I was
it's, on the original map, it has the actual measurement. On the proposed final development, the measure is all the same on each one.
Total, yeah.
Yeah, but if you look at lot 1, from the initial square footage to the final square footage, it's a really small
6 feet.
it's a really small increase, but the rest of the other lot lines are essentially the same. So I would imagine that this measure is essentially the same as you're saying, comparing the other.
So I was just looking at this number is 89 something, and this one looks like it's 144.
Well,
which-
but that's what I'm saying is that these
Yeah,
are all showing the total
Yeah.
versus the actual.
Okay, that's
Yeah.
what caused me confusion, because I'm
But-
thinking that's more than 41 feet.
But since the other ones are demonstrating that they're essentially the same, and since the total square footage is essentially the same,
Okay,
it's a really small.
And it doesn't sound like it matters because we can't change it anyway, so.
It's tied to lot 2, so.
yeah.
Regardless.
I'm ready to move on.
Okay. All right, we got all the questions of the applicant, I think. All right.
Oh, wait, I have one thing to clarify. On page 4 of 9, under the Walton Valley Fire and Rescue comments, they talk about that the condition of approval that must be satisfied prior to final building occupancy for lots 2, 3, and 4 should be lots 1, 2, and 3. I believe that, because they're talking about the
Yes.
private road, serving those lots, and so I think they just had a number out of order there.
So can you tell me
This-
which
so
condition is that?
It's the new condition G7, and the condition of approval is accurate, but the statement from Tualatin Valley Fire and
Oh.
Rescue is inaccurate.
I think they just meant 1, 2, 3, and 4. The one right there. This one's still trying out.
It's on page 14
Thank
of our
you.
packet.
Oh, okay. I was looking at Tualatin Valley's letter.
So we don't need to change
Yeah.
that, because Tualatin Valley,
We got it right in our conditions.
we've got it right in our conditions, all right. Okay, before we call up Lisa and Roger Walker, there was a request in their original memo to us to have extended time. And the way our rules for the meetings work is that comment time is limited to 4 minutes, but we have the ability to modify meeting procedures on a case-by-case basis when especially complicated issues arise or when the body is involved in extraordinary dialogue, but only after receiving the advice and majority consent of the body. The chair may also cut short debate if in his judgment the best interest of the city would be served. So the request has been made by the next person wishing to testify for extended time, and this would be a majority vote of the commission if we choose to extend time beyond 4 minutes per person.
Do we?
Can I ask a question of them, or do you can ask a question? As
Question.
long as they're not gonna talk about lot 1, because we have no ability to change that
They
condition.
can talk about whatever they want, but it doesn't
Are we
change.
gonna set what the new limit is, or is it just open-ended?
No, we can, well, we can do whatever.
I was just gonna suggest that if they're up there to talk to us about trying to extend it to lot 1, that's a waste of our time, and I don't wanna extend the time. But if they have other issues, then maybe, I don't know.
Let's,
We asked the,
Can we, ask them what
okay,
their,
all right,
expectation.
all right,
Get started and we.
because I mean, there's two of
Probably
them, so
done
that's 8
in 4
minutes,
minutes.
so.
okay,
I'm happy to do 8 minutes.
okay, so there we go.
Total time between the two of you.
Yeah, there we
Is 8
go.
minutes normal?
Slam dunk.
So that's
Yeah.
it. How many extra time?
Do you need more than 8 minutes?
I don't think so.
No.
Okay.
We don't think so, but we'll be open-ended.
Okay, what's the last question? Lisa and Roger Walker, 23500 Southwest Murdoch Road, Sherwood 97140. And once again, it's so frustrating to be out there because I think we could have said something to cut that whole conversation much shorter.
Mhm.
So, when we first saw some early on map, whether it was mismarked or something, were under the impression that lot 2 extended a certain distance on our property. And based on these, they changed not at all, so it is moot. We understand if the lot line in fact did not change or changed, I think it's, if you look at the way if I'm looking at it correctly, and it is confusing and it's a little disconcerting that the maps maybe are labeled wrong, but it says 89 and 90, and then it came down to 89.5 or something like that. That is not important. So we are fine with keeping it at lot 2. However, the conversation that ensued is a little concerning because it appears that because of the way we did this, it's really lot 2, not over any particular area of land, which was what the intent was. And unfortunately, sometimes that's why we've gone through such depth of all this stuff it's all about the intent, and to get caught up in little words like lot 2 instead of this amount of distance. I think we know what the intent was, and it in fact was all over lot 2. The initial conversation we had, they thought it was lot 1. We couldn't say anything because we were done with our 4 minutes. So we had to wait till city council, and so we got that all squared away. So if the lot line does not change significantly, and in case I think it's 6 inches maybe, we are perfectly happy and with as it's written. So no additional conversation.
You have about
needed
8
on
more minutes.
that. Okay. But I need a clarification again from Josh about, and I guess from Joy, if they come back, if something comes back from this and it is substantial, what is substantial? Is it, 5 feet would make a difference. And it's just a matter of, if it's south 5 feet, that would make a difference essentially in the view corridor, because essentially the intent was where lot 2 is currently placed. So we should have changed the words to say where lot 2 is currently placed instead of saying lot 2. I mean, that's kind of,
So, So one of the key things is that these are all professional certified surveyors. So in regards to major significant changes, I'm not projecting that's gonna occur.
Absolutely not, and we are not either, so.
And so I'm not so much worried in regards to that, is the minor things where the legal description says west and it should be
Yeah.
east and things like that. So I'm not projecting that to happen
Of course.
where, but again, like what Josh was indicating, the way that the condition is written, it is tied to lot 2 versus us saying the condition where it needed to be surveyed and that we needed to establish, you know, the line, that wasn't the direction that we
Yeah,
were
yeah.
going.
But Josh, I mean, is there any threshold in terms of movement on those property lines that would amount to substantial?
So it's not a black and white, there's a line where you cross. It's substantial. Substantial is one of those words that lawyers love because we'll get to argue back and forth. One side will say it's substantial, the other side will say it's not substantial. And, you know, at some point, the city will say that's actually substantial, and
So
the applicant will disagree. And
if there were an amount that were significant enough that argument arose, it would essentially then have to go back to city council. Is that what you're saying?
But we would at that point say that it's not compliant, and the applicant would either have to change their plans to comply or seek a
So
modification.
it's up to Joy to determine what's substantial. Yeah. So that's.
So it would be nice to enjoy.
So what comes down to is, this is the last time it's gonna be before anybody except staff, which is just a check mark, and that was the reason for my first request on my letter to you, was lot 2, I think we're fine. It doesn't appear that it's moving, the lot line has moved, our mistake. If that is the case, there are some things written differently, and so if in fact it has not moved, lot 2 is just fine, we're good. So let's not worry about that one anymore. The first request had to do with the definition of finished floor elevation. And in conversations and in the staff report, it said that, you know, Joy agreed with the assessment that it is the habitable level of flooring. And that's how that was the intent, that's how we all went around it. My request is that we clarify with just some words in this now, and that's not changing the condition, just clarifying it from staff, having it written out in the condition specifically this way or something like this, so that when Joy wins the lottery and is not here next year, we don't have to go deep in the bowels of the staff report to find that one sentence. And I don't have to babysit this so tightly because it's written very clearly in the staff report for the person who is in Joy's position in a year when she is in Hawaii. Or Bali. So that was the reason for it. I think we all agree, and in the staff report, she said we do concur that it is the description, that it is the lowest level of our home. And it sounds like the applicant is fine with that. And I haven't seen Exhibit F, so I don't know what the response was to that. But assuming that that is still the case, I don't know why we couldn't at this time just clarify the wording on that, so that going forward, it is very clear. That is the request we have.
Can I ask Staff a question?
I'll let her finish her statement.
So I think that that's pretty much it, yeah.
Clarifying condition. So that,
Just basically wording it, and I guess technically I'd be saying something now about a lot line between 1 and 2, but that would really be substantially changing that condition. This is just using the words that we've already agreed to.
so we'll call a recess before we do that, and I would like to ask staff if a clarifying condition is something that is.
So you do not have the authority at this juncture in the process to change the condition, even just to add language clarifying. The condition is final and approved by city council.
Is the
But we
language,
can-
sorry.
What we can do, and what we have done is say, this is how city staff interprets that condition, and how city staff intends to enforce that condition.
Okay, and that's already in this staff
That's in the
report.
staff.
And that's the only place it will appear, is in the staff report.
And that's because it's outside the conditions that we are here to approve tonight, correct?
They've already been
You are
approved.
applying conditions, you are not changing conditions.
And we're not interpreting conditions, then, you're
Right.
saying?
You're not even
Right.
interpreting conditions.
But is that condition within the 1 through 13 of
It's not even in the conditions that
Okay,
apply.
that's, I didn't see it, so I just
Not
want
even
to
this
clarify, it's not in there,
Not even one of
so
the conditions.
it's a moot point as far as I'm concerned.
It's
Okay.
really
It
that-
isn't one of the conditions that are for you tonight, it is stepping back to the wanting to look at those clarification of language, but I understand what you're saying, so that's not something
Is
we
the
can do.
language that's used, like the finished floor elevation language, is that a pretty standard language and is it pretty widely accepted universally what it means, or is that?
That is beyond my expertise.
I'm speaking to staff.
But in talking to our building official, who would be our resident expert, he said that is the lowest habitable level. That is what that term
It's on the
means.
record, and
So-
it's in the staff report, and so we're good.
All right.
And I did understand it wasn't something that was before you guys tonight, just didn't know whether we could adjust it, so it sounds like we can't. So I think we're good to go.
All right, any more
No further
questions?
issues on our part.
All right. All right, thank you very much.
Thank you. I think we can all go home.
We're on schedule to be earlier than our last meeting, so,
It would hard.
It's all with us.
no, it's a council, with our last hearing, last
It
week.
was the high school.
Oh, gosh.
All right,
Okay.
all right, so now we have an opportunity for the applicant to provide rebuttal testimony to, if you choose to.
We're good.
Okay, so there is no rebuttal testimony from that. Are there any other people wishing to testify this evening? Proponent, opponent, or neutral? Then we will close the public hearing and we will not take any further testimony. Do we have any questions of staff regarding this matter? All right.
I'm a little lost with what we're doing here. I mean, why does the code have us even review this if we can't interpret the code to apply it to the specifics of the condition? We're just here to say, staff, you got it right, they met the condition, or staff, you got it wrong, they didn't meet the condition. And that seems to be really something that staff should be able to do, on almost a consent agenda, and
Typically,
say,
that is correct. Staff
it's-
typically does do that, but since this is a plan unit development.
PUD is making us go through this extra
Right.
hearing.
Correct. It's a process as written in the code.
Well, we need to change the code.
Well,
There's a
we-
lot
and
of
we
things in the
can't-
code that need to get changed.
And we can't change the code tonight either, so.
Okay.
We are limited, our authority is limited.
Thank you.
All right, then we have a motion from the commission.
We do.
All right,
So we're just approving the site plan. That's it.
We're proving
And the
compliance with the
subdivision.
conditions of the
And the
city
plat.
council.
and the plat and the lines.
The final development plan and the subdivision.
Okay.
So as it was presented, right?
Yeah, no modifications.
All right. I move the Sherwood Planning Commission to approve the application for PUD 17-01 and South 17-01 final development plan based on the applicant testimony, public testimony received, and the analysis findings and conditions in the staff report.
Is there a second?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded that we approve PUD 1701, SUB 1701 final development plan. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? Motion passed. We have completed that. Thank you. Thank you very much for your time. We have, I got two of these. Planning Commissioner announcements. One, I just wanted to.
We're still in session.
So they have a hard time with the recording, so we'll have to.
Thank you.
Thank you. There was an email sent out regarding the tour of the Wilsonville treatment plant. I only saw a couple commissioners respond yet. Did everybody get the email about that?
Oh, yeah, when was that?
Well, we have to, there's a little link to go to, it's a poll to figure out what time's available. So if you have an opportunity, click the link and follow it and sign up for what date you're going to work for. The other announcement and what I've spoken with Julia on is, as you know, or may not know, we have new commissioners, and the rules regarding our email are such that if any emails are sent to you and your personal, you are required to maintain a record of it at some level, which Josh could probably explain in full detail of what we have to keep and how long we have to keep it, or we have to turn it over to staff to archive for us on any matter before the planning commission. And it's subject to,
So you're telling us we need to get all new email addresses, this is the only thing that we do, so if they don't go through our whole personal lives when they wanna do
if
it?
they want to subpoena your personal email,
They want a lot of spam.
No kidding.
They have the ability to do that if you use your personal email and don't have a good archival storage of that. We're also required to keep notes or turn over our notes from the meeting to the staff to store for us. So I've approached Julie about getting it. She says she would not have it in place by this evening, but she wants to make sure that, and we need to, if you're wanting to have an email address that is archived by the city, and so it would be a sherwoodoregon.gov email address, there's a cost to the city, but they will take care of the archiving. If not, then you can create your own separate email address that you only use for planning commission correspondence, but you're still in charge of archiving it for yourself. You can create a new email address. And so Julia said they're willing to give us sherwoodoregon.gov email addresses, but you have to check it. You have to be committed to check a separate email address. And so I don't know how she wants to take it, but we need to communicate with Julia if we want a separate email address.
Can I ask a question of our staff that would archive it? So if I created, City Sherwood Council Member Cottle or Commissioner Cottle at Gmail, could I give them access so they could go in there and grab all those emails once a month and store them on their server, so it's just easier so that, if they get something, because that happened to Rob Drake, by the way, and he got his whole personal computers at home and everything else searched when he was suing Nike, or Nike was suing him. So I know it happens, and it's not a pleasant experience.
Right. So I don't know from a technical standpoint, maybe Mark does, but it seems to me that would be a manual process, and we probably would not want to add that to IT's workload to manually go in.
Okay,
and
so I could give them a
check it out.
CD and say, here's all my emails from this account for the last 6 months.
Mark, feel free to jump in. My thought would be, we'd like to either be the city
Okay.
is doing it, or you're doing it, not that you're doing it and turning it over to the city and we're manually processing.
I agree with Josh.
Okay, I just didn't know what to.
So if we were to get a city address, it's pretty much archived if it comes to that.
Yeah.
And then-
I prefer that method, it's easier to be.
Yeah.
And
And
so,
just from.
I'm just curious, like, my last 3 years, what does that mean? Because
Groundhog Day.
that if
No.
you're responsible to so if you are subpoenaed, you have to,
at least give them from point A to point B of when we changed over, if we
Right.
changed over.
That's right.
Okay.
Yes.
And I don't know if this was in Julie's email. From my perspective, though, the other issue is, it's not just one of retention, but also one of access. So if you're a planning commissioner and you leave that position, if you had a sherwoodoregon.gov email address, we still have access to that.
No,
If you leave and you forget to give us your password, you move to Guam or something, and we don't have access to those, that's a problem. So my preference would be to have the Sherwood, Oregon email address. That way we've got direct access to those files.
And does that limit the scope of any subpoena to that email address and any correspondence?
They can still subpoena whatever they want. but we would, if you're doing
I'm
all
hoping you would argue
Yes.
vehemently that my personal laptop and all the documents on there are not discoverable.
Right, if you're doing all your city business on your sherwoodoregon.gov email address, we're certainly gonna make that argument.
And then that requires that if we receive an email, because my personal email address has been used and inadvertently sent out by staff in a to email where other people could read it. And So if I receive an email to, and this is the way it was explained to me, if I receive an email at my personal email related to a planning commission document, I should forward it to the Sherwood Gov
Yep.
email address and then respond to it from there, and then that do not respond from your regular.
I'm happy with the Sherwood.org or gov thing, because then I can just link it to Outlook and it can go grab all of the emails at one time, and I see them all at once anyway.
Right, but you have to respond from Sherwood.
Right. You can set that up
I
automatically.
have 7 email addresses set up on my phone already, so if one is no problem.
Like
So-
more.
7?
Yeah.
What's one more?
So based on that
We'll need all kinds of
information,
secret labs.
who do we tell the powers that be?
Transferred over to Julia.
I will inform Julia, that is the
Okay.
request.
All right, that is everybody want that, or you can?
Oh, yeah.
Yay.
Yes,
Yes.
okay, great.
And if someone would contact Commissioner Matzinger to confirm his preference.
Okay.
And then how do you provide communication, like if we choose to not suck it into our Outlook, do you send us an email saying, you know, check your Sherwood?
No, they can't, because then your
Yeah,
personal
yeah.
one becomes subject to the subpoena.
So then we're just responsible for checking them?
At least you have an Office 365 portal or something you can log into.
Yeah, there is one.
Okay, all right.
Add it to your phone, and then you'll see it on your phone, and then go on.
And then your
computer.
phone can be subpoenaed.
If they would just do any of my work, that would be great too. All right, so that was the big announcement, and that's all I had. Is any, Vice Chair Flores, would you have any announcements regarding the summer plans?
I do.
Excellent,
If you
excellent.
haven't got your tickets for Hello Dolly, this Thursday is the last day that you can get them at the lower cost. If you want to pay more, then you can pay after that day.
Sherwood always sells those out, right?
We tried to, but come see Hello Dolly, support the arts here in Sherwood.
Excellent. All right, any other planning commissioner announcements?
The only thing, I did send Julie an email and everybody and asked Josh just to give us a brief memo on, there was an issue as to what our standard is to put conditions on things. And I went back and read the Dolan case, I'm like, oh, that really helped. Rough proportionality
Yeah.
test. It'd be nice for you just to send it to us all so we know exactly what we can and can't do.
That's
Yeah,
right, there's
so
a,
there's some
training
discussion
memo.
about doing a work session or something on that. I can give you the nutshell right now and it may be sufficient, which is that case, the Supreme Court said it doesn't have to be mathematically precise, right? And subsequently, other lower courts have gradually inched towards, it's pretty close to mathematically precise. Like, they're not gonna require you to get to 2 decimal points of accuracy. But yeah, it's gotta be, I mean, you gotta have evidence showing that it is basically as close as you can get.
Right.
So it's not really, there's not like a black and white, like it has to be within $2.73, but it has to be.
Context here, like, yeah, I'm sorry. I'm just-
Oh, so,
So
right,
there's 3, and Eric is writing up a memo, Nolan, Dolan, and Kuntz.
right.
Sounds like a law firm.
Yeah, and those are the Supreme Court cases that kind of set out this framework.
It's not as rough as the Supreme Court suggests proportionality.
Right, well, they suggested that, and then, you know, what the Supreme Court does is they decide a case and kind of, in broad terms, sets out what the law is, then lower courts subsequently interpret that and apply it to specific cases.
And
so
so
the
it
Supreme
has-
Court said that, you know, when you're having an exaction in connection with the land use application, right? So you're saying, you're building the high school, the new high school, and we're gonna require you to make these transportation improvements to the roundabout, right? That the cost of the improvements that you're requiring them to make have to be roughly proportional to the impact that they're causing with their development. And they said, it does not have to be mathematically precise, it just has to be roughly proportional. Those are the words they used. And as cases have been decided under that framework, the courts have gradually moved more and more towards, it has to be pretty close.
Especially with technical stuff.
Yeah, right, exactly.
So-
And because it's possible to get very close.
Right.
So
Well, I
it's
think the
as close as
Supreme
you
Court
possibly
cited
can.
to the dissenting opinion in Dolan from the Oregon Supreme Court, and the dissenting opinion said, we can get mathematically correct. If you can, you have to get there. If you can't get mathematically correct, you don't have to get there. I think that's what it said. So I just wanted to make sure I still understood the rough proportionality.
So that Eric was putting together a memo that helps us
Perfect.
understand takings and exactions and the rough proportionality. And another request would be to have a framework by which we can understand, as each type of application comes forth, when a condition is subject to review by the planning commission, and if we don't agree with the condition, the findings that have to be changed. We can't say, you know, really need to have all the houses in this development be a particular shade of gray. We can't make a condition that does that unless we have a finding that goes back to our code that
Allows it.
or requires it. And so as we go through this process of learning things that are relevant to the decisions that we're making and things that we can impact versus things that are very much finite and what can't be changed because that's, you know, not within our code or our purview, that is, you know, I think part of the staff report, but also part of our training and learning what we need to do.
And you kind of relate to that, actually, I think the other question from Commissioner Cuddle's email was regarding kind of, do we have to comply with like traffic studies, for example? Or what weight do we have to give those based on our experience?
Right.
And so the LUBA, or the land use term, is substantial evidence.
Right.
It's not just any evidence. Your decision has to be based on substantial evidence in the record, not just any evidence.
But what?
And what that's been,
Substantial.
right. And so what that's been interpreted to mean is for technical issues, it generally has to be evidence that's coming from a technical expert.
Or we found substantial error in their methodology.
Sure. But if you're making a decision about what traffic improvements have to be made, it's got to be tied to a traffic realistically. There was a case, for example, where it was about like impacts on endangered salmon. And they had some, I don't know what they call it, salmonologist or whatever, had some like expert opinion that this was going to impact salmon. And then there was an opposing party's attorney wrote a letter arguing that it was not. Well, an attorney is an expert on the law, but not on salmon. And so in that case, the governing body decided they were giving more weight to the attorney's opinion,
Right.
and that was not substantial evidence.
We had a case here where we had two tree experts determining whether you use the tree drip line or the distance from the trunk of the tree to the same distance from the height of the tree to determine a safe barrier to be able to create a perimeter to correct.
What'd you decide? Then it comes down to credibility.
Right.
You've got two.
So that's a great example. If you
You've
have
got two
two
opposing,
experts who disagree,
two
then you
dueling
basically
tree
you're choosing.
and that's where you have a dueling tree expert
Right.
That must have been
situation.
really enlightening meeting.
Yeah. Not as long as the high school, but it was.
So did I answer all those questions?
Yeah.
Yeah, and so we're gonna be getting information from Eric, correct, to write up,
I
I
believe
believe.
so.
Do they want these binders?
And, yeah, and in the binders themselves, you can leave for staff to recycle, correct?
And you want these planning commission binders back so you can stuff the next one full?
I will
No.
send information to you next
Oh,
time and you can stuff them. But I will recycle your stuffed content.
Yeah.
Let the record
Turn of the
show,
black.
she told the commissioners to stuff it.
As long as you three-hole punch it, we can stuff it.
Thank
All
you.
right,
Are we meeting in 2 weeks?
when's our next meeting?
We have nothing on the books at this time.
Right, there might be a work session, but I'm not quite sure what that entails. But we will definitely email you and let you know.
Great.
All right, cool, thank you for your indulgence. We're adjourned.